So I'm going to go ahead and introduce everyone who's going to be sharing with you in this session. I'm Dázon Dixon Diallo. Hey. And but for right now, because our first speaker is coming through the Zoom. Oh, I'm in Massachusetts. I can say Boston. Okay. What is it? Boston, Mass. 02134. What? Remember that. Young people, I'm going to do the Zoom for everybody later. Okay, I'm just going to ask, how many in this room actually remember Zoom?
I do.
The show. The only thing we ever got from the North on Georgia Public Television was, Boston Public Television, Zoom. All right, which came right after the electric company. Anyway, I'm the Sesame Street generation. Anyway, so, which makes me the oldest of the Gen Xers. So, our conversation this afternoon is titled Beyond the Dominant Paradigm, Black Women Imagining Alternative Reproductive Justice Futures. And it's a catch-all for really different ways of thinking in the now for the future. And so I'm excited to introduce our panel, which will include none other than Alexis, Pauline, Gumbs, self-named queer Black troublemaker, and Black feminist love evangelist. Afrofuturism and Black women's magical theorizing is what we're talking about. I love it. What were we talking about earlier? Lynn was in the room. We were talking about Black girl magic and how that might be a part of that race paradigm we talked about earlier today. Nesta Johnson, yay! Intersectional family liberation advocate, talking today queer as skin folk. Family law and policy at the intersections. Welcome. And the dynamic duo themselves. Robynne Lucas, who is a Smith alum, 2022. Yeah. And a member of the Women Now Steering Committee. And Fhrynée Lambert, Smith alum, 2024. And a member of the Women Now Steering Committee. And their conversation with us this afternoon is Promise or Panic? Do we freak out now, later, or nah? All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to run with our time, but we're a few, like one or two speakers, less than a lot of the other groups, so you may have a little more time, or we have much more time in the room to have a conversation. But at this moment, all eyes on Alexis.
All right.
Woo! Hi, everyone. It's really awkward to not see you. I've been watching the live stream, and I can tell, even through YouTube, that somehow you all just like smell really good in a way that's not aggravating anyone's allergies. So I want to congratulate you on that, and just for the wisdom and magic that you're circulating at this time. I'm really honored to be a part of this think tank and to be beamed in from far away. I would really love to be in the room with you all and accessing all the hugs, but I'm not. So thank you especially to the goddess, Loretta J. Ross, for inviting me to be here. And, we've talked before about this idea of reproductive justice futurisms, and I do have some words to share. I'm also dedicating my participation to two of my mentors, Shay Youngblood, who is a recent ancestor, already mentioned yesterday by Mama Philly, Avery, and also one of my mentors who is living in this realm, Nikki Finney. And I mention them both because they are writers, storyteller, mentors of mine, but also key participants in the reproductive justice movement. And I'm really holding their presence and their mentorship as I remember, I was having a little struggle. Crystal, you mentioned being like, why am I here? And I was like, right, because our creativity, our cultural work, our poetic imagining and dreaming has always been part of the reproductive justice movement, and it must be. And those are some of the mentors who I know were involved in that Atlanta movement and involved with Black Women's Health Project, Become Health Imperative, and who I met in Karis Bookstore, which was a place where a lot of those folks connected. So I'm going to read a poem by Audre Lorde. I'm reading it out of my collected poems of Audre Lorde, which you can see is falling apart because I hold it every single day. And this is my copy of the collected poems of Audre Lorde that I got when I was 14 at Karis Books, which is where I met Nikki Finney and where I met Shay Youngblood. And I have so much to say, but that was in the time. Okay, I'm telling you now. That was in the time when I was honored to have my first ever paid facilitation gig, which was to help facilitate the babies, the young people at Black Women's Health Project in the basement of Mother House in Atlanta to create their newsletter. And their newsletter was, for me, it was kind of like how watching this on live stream has been for me over the past couple days. They were light years ahead of where I could ever be. And the way they were talking about gender and choice and sexuality and freedom inspires me to this moment. And this past couple days, I've also heard words I've never heard. I've never heard the word long-termism before. There's so much about reproductive technology and genetics that I was not aware of that I learned about in this space. And so I'm feeling a portal open between teenage summer job Alexis and, grown, awkwardly big screen poet beaming from elsewhere Alexis at this time. Okay, so the poem that I want to read by Audre Lorde is called Learning to Write. Learning to Write by Audre Lorde. I'm sorry, I also have another disclaimer. Sorry, y'all, I'm just like this. Another context moment, which is that there's a moment where Audre Lorde uses the word dumb in this poem in a way that could be ableist, it could be internalized ableist. She's referring to her status as a non-speaking person for the first 5 years of her life when she uses that, and I want to flag that. Learning to Write by Audre Lorde. Is the alphabet responsible for the book in which it is written that makes me peevish and nasty and wish I were dumb again? We practiced drawing our letters, digging into the top of the desk, and old Sister Amard wrapped our knuckles until they bled. She was the meanest of all, and, like in another term, we knew she was crazy, but none of the grown-ups would listen to us until she died in a madhouse. I am a bleak heroism of words that refuse to be buried alive with the liars. Okay, so that's Audre Lorde, Learning to Write. And I offer that today because thinking about reproductive futurisms, thinking about the wise purpose of this gathering, which as I understand it, is really to look at what's coming, to face bravely the narrative of the future that cowardly billionaires are writing, and then also to gather ourselves, our ancestors, our lineages, and our generations of brilliance to author the story that we want, author the story that honors our place in what Loretta calls the chain of freedom. And this question of the alphabet, of the actual language, and how our legacies, our literatures, our poetic practice can be tangible resources for our communities in transformation is the reason why I'm here. I think it's the reason why I was invited here. And so Audre Lorde asked this question: is it the alphabet's fault that I hate the book it was written in? Is it the language that we speak that I should blame for my response to the hateful things that are spoken about us? What are the building blocks, right? We've been talking about genetics, we've been talking about eggs and embryos, but we've also been talking about the terminology and how much it matters how we talk about these issues that we're facing as communities. I really appreciate it when Valerie Joseph said, it matters how we talk about what has happened and what will happen. It matters that we claim the alphabets that we have. So, only a few minutes because I'm excited for all the other panelists that I'm glad to be able to see you all now, by the way. You're so beautiful. So when we think about reproductive futurisms, reproductive justice futurisms, when I was talking with Loretta about this a few years back, I had the honor of being the other guest speaker in a class where she was the guest speaker. I was like, y'all don't need another guest speaker. Like, you have Loretta J. Ross, not only because of the fact that obviously, Loretta, you have enough to say to fill curricula for millennia to come, but also just because of how much I'm still learning from you. You raised this idea of reproductive justice futurisms, and I have ever since then been thinking about there's reproductive and there's reproductive. So there's reproductive, obviously, as a key term in reproductive justice, that is the term that has convened us. We're thinking about how life continues. We're thinking about autonomy over whether to give birth or not. We're thinking about autonomy of being able to parent and for families not to be policed, all of these things. But in that term reproductive, we're talking about an embodied relationship to the future. So reproductive justice has always been an intergenerational movement shaped by this ethic of accountability that honors generations back and goes generations forward. Yes. And then reproductive in my own lexicon as a queer studies scholar I was bringing up has this other piece where we're always asking the question of what about the society that we have now should not be reproduced in the future? What are the forms, for example, the forms of systemic oppression that we're surviving right now that we actually don't want to make again, right? So if reproductive in a particular way means make again, we understand that that's being operationalized in one of the most harmful slogans of our time, right? Make something again. And we're not trying to perpetuate into the future. We're not trying to project eternal nostalgia onto time through our practice of reproductive justice. But what is the queering, the opening, the questioning that allows us to do that? Which is all to say, what is our responsibility in terms of how we speak to each other, who we prioritize, which I know is also one of the framing questions of this gathering, that allow us to always remember that reproductive justice is a transformative movement. And it's not a movement based on scarcity and holding on to old nostalgic narratives, but it is something that has to allow us to be vessels open enough to the energy that's flowing through from before we can remember and into, as Loretta said yesterday, beyond our dreams. Okay, so that is mostly the way I'm thinking about it, and I'm hearing it in how important it is when Dorothy Roberts talks about the use of, has talked about and written about for years, of course, but also reiterated in this space the use of race as a predictive technology, right? The importance of being able to predict using a pseudoscience of race. Also, the importance of the predictive value of binary gender, right? This emphasis on binary gender and this supposed idea that something about our chromosomes means that our expression of what life is should operate on a binary, which is absurd, is all about trying to be able to predict something. The queer danger, which is also a Black danger, of the fact that we can never be contained in binaries. We are manifestations of life loving itself. And if you look around at any of life, all of the species that we're interconnected with, it's profoundly unpredictable how life will manifest, how love will manifest. And so one of the things that I want to raise around this question of the most vulnerable is to reiterate the queerness of Black parenting. Kathy Cohen and many others have raised this and brought this up, but to think about that queerness, which is always the imposed criminality of Black parenting, especially Black mothering, as Dorothy Roberts also raised here and has raised elsewhere. And also specifically the parents of trans children, and remembering that even before this presidential executive order and presidential mandate around binary gender and erasure of the websites and all of this harm, we saw the consolidation of this scapegoating of trans people specifically mobilized against trans children. And when I think about that vulnerability, this is something that is actually hard for me to talk about for multiple reasons, but in this moment because of how cowardly it is for billionaires to target any children, but in particular, the children who are facing cruelty and bullying already in their institutional settings and in institutional settings that are being made more hostile by the moment. It is at the same time a revelation of the cowardice and weakness of these people who hoard wealth. And it is a mandate for those of us who understand that we, informed by an intersectional Black feminist movement, always must stand for and listen to the most vulnerable to say, oh, it's our infinite possibility. It's our unpredictability. It's our love and the vulnerability of that love. It's our mothering in the way that Audre Lorde defines mothering in her essay, Eye to Eye, Black Women, Hatred, and Anger, when she says we can learn to mother ourselves. She describes what mothering means, and she says it's nurturing something without knowing what the outcome will be. It's that practice, which have centuries of practice in our communities, that is the most dangerous, threatening thing to the oligarchs who feel like by scapegoating trans children, they can have control over the majority. And so I want to cede it to the discussion because I'm excited to keep listening. I've been getting my whole life listening to what everyone in here has shared over the past couple days, and I'm so grateful, again, to have access, even though I wasn't able to be there with you all in person. But I want to raise that specifically to say that there is an infinite value in our unpredictability, which is our intimacy with all life on the planet. And my study of that comes through the Black feminist poets and writers who are always teaching us how to look for that, how to observe that. But I also want to say explicitly that I am looking to, in particular, parents of color who are parents of trans children, who are advocating for them at this time as visionary leaders that are really important to what I see as the future of our reproductive justice movement. Thank you all so much for your listening. I'm excited to keep this room and the true and necessary miracle that's happening here. Thank you.
Wow. Woo. Thank you, Alexis. Thank you. One more time. Yeah. And yes, you are far from done with us this afternoon. So just stay tuned, stay engaged, stay with us. That's my tagline for my show. You all are welcome to tune in every Thursday at 6 o'clock. Because, Alexis, there's other conversations we're going to have. And then when we get to Fhrynée and Robynne, they'll have a conversation that they'll invite everyone into. So, Nesta. Up next, folks, Nesta Johnson. And Robynne and Fhrynée, if you all want to come on up, that would be great. Or sit where you want to sit so that everybody can see.
So, hi y'all.
Juice it has.
Once again, I'm Nesta Johnson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an attorney and currently a free agent. I think I mentioned this before, but hire me. So I'm here to talk to you all today about family law and policy at the intersections. And I will spare you a recitation of all of my identities, but suffice it to say that I exist at so many intersections, I say they might as well put in a roundabout. So being here has been incredible and refreshing for a lot of reasons, one of which is that this is one of the few conferences where I haven't been chased around by a photographer. Trying to get some diversity in their shots. So I spent 5 years representing over 700 children in family policing cases in Brooklyn Family Court. I went to law school to do family policing cases, although I didn't know that term at that time because I am a survivor of that system myself. I then spent 2 years representing kids at the appellate level in family policing and also high conflict custody cases. The past 4 years I spent working to advance recognition and respect for LGBTQ+ families, with a focus on enacting laws that would create a pathway to legal parentage for non-genetic parents. Just as a very quick overview, parentage is the legal relationship between parent and child. A lot of rights and responsibilities flow from that relationship. The rights to have standing to seek custody, the constitutional rights associated with being a parent, a child's right to receive support, a child's ability to receive things like Social Security benefits if you were to pass away. All of those things are connected to legal parentage. And the states, there's a real patchwork. There's a real patchwork of laws around the country relating to parentage and huge variations in the pathways available to non-genetic parents. Generally speaking, absent a surrogacy agreement, giving birth does establish legal parentage, and non-birthing genetic parents can establish through acknowledgement of their parentage or through genetic testing. Now, a non-genetic parent of a child conceived through formal or informal assisted reproduction or a non-ART related non-genetic parenting situation, such as somebody parenting their partner's child with another person. Those people are extremely vulnerable without that legal relationship. If the adult relationship ends, the genetic parent may seek not only to oppose the non-genetic parent having custody or visitation with the child, but actually deny that that person even has the right to seek custody or visitation, and seeks to have that person considered by the court a legal stranger with no more right to seek or care for that child than any rando off the streets who think they could do better than you. Being on a birth certificate, I always have to say this, is not enough to establish legal parentage. courts can and do take people off of birth certificates. So not fun fact for you all. And a lot of queer orgs have a lot of resources on sort of what it might look like in your state and what the pathways are available to folks. But the important thing, moving on from my mini spiel, is to say that this is what is severed when, as Dorothy referenced earlier, somebody's parental rights are terminated. So the standard spiel that I spent years giving, and which I did believe in deeply, is that all families are worthy of recognition and respect, and all parent-child relationships are worthy of having that security and that stability. Yes, and. The reality is that even if every U.S. jurisdiction enacted what we consider the gold standard, the Uniform Parentage Act, or similar laws, not all families would enjoy recognition and respect, because there is no such thing as secure legal parentage for Black and brown people so long as the family policing system exists. 1 in 3 children in the U.S. and over half of all Black children will be subjected to a child protective investigation, air quotes, by age 18. Nearly 8 million children in 2023 were reported to state registries. More than half of those reports, around 5 million, involving around 5 million children, were not even deemed worthy of investigation by the state. And it's a low bar. So these mandated reporters, I mean, really high key calling because somebody has a scratch. Of the 3 million children whose reports were investigated, more than 80% were found not to have been abused or neglected. It never went to court, it stopped there. And it's important to note that for that 80%, they still experience terror and trauma. The way that caseworkers show up, roll up on families, often with police, bust into somebody's house, strip searches their children. I mean, the way that this goes down is deeply, deeply terrifying and traumatic for parents and children. Recently, I've been learning and also teaching about the phenomenon of moral injury, specifically as it relates to child welfare professionals of color. Moral injury occurs when a person who has power or authority in a high-stakes situation acts in a way that transgresses their own morals or values. They fail to live up to their own morals or values. Or they can also sustain that injury through experiencing betrayal or anger or feeling misled regarding the nature or the purpose of the mission that they were given from above. This is a concept that first emerged in relation to the military context, was later expanded to medical contexts, and from there to other helping professions and places where people encounter situations that involve high-stakes moral decisions, which includes certainly working in the family regulation field. So the root harm, the harm of moral injury really is that it shakes the foundations of a person's beliefs about themselves, other people, or the world. And it's important to note that parents and children, not just professionals encountering this system, encounter moral injury. Imagine being a parent who is prohibited by court order from discussing the case with your child. Imagine being on one of your two-hour visits a week with your child and not being able to answer the questions, why is this happening? When am I coming home? Because answering that question could make it longer, because there is a caseworker 2 feet away scribbling down everything that you are doing and everything that you are saying, expecting you to redirect your child's question, whether they are 6 or 16. Okay? Children also experience moral injury. Remember, it shakes the foundations of your beliefs about how the world works. And little kids believe that their parents are superheroes. Little kids believe that their parents have the power to keep them safe. And the system annihilates that belief in an instant. A lot of folks who are not Black feel empowered to speak about Black people and sometimes over Black people in intersectional spaces in our absence, and to speak over us in our presence. queer people are disproportionately likely to be poor, to be people of color, to be disabled. I think probably that's no surprise to the people in this room, but maybe a lot of normies could be surprised by that because there was a deliberate and strategic choice by the movement to present white, middle class, able bodied queer people as the faces of the movement, right? Assumptions that advocates for one community, because that overlap exists, can therefore speak for the others, and that what benefits one population will benefit the others, right? We know that there's a lot of overlap in the needs and interests of different marginalized groups, but that Venn diagram is not a circle. And the work on a particular issue, of course, should be led by those most impacted, and funding intended to advance racial justice should go to organizations and advocates who specialize, not dabble, in racial justice. The fact that Black and brown queer people exist, many of whom also build families through surrogacy and adoption, especially through adoption from the foster care system, which is more accessible to lower income people than some of those other routes, does not absolve queer advocates who claim to stand for racial and economic justice from the reality that some queer people are benefiting from and perpetuating racial and economic injustice by creating a demand for children. Whether public or private, the supply of adoptable infants comes primarily from people who place or are separated from their children due to a lack of resources and support. Folks considering assisted reproduction should take the time to consider why they are choosing that route, what value they place on genetic connection, and what that means for the status of any co-parents who will not be connected. It is on each individual to make sure that they are not causing harm to the people whose gametes and wombs they may be borrowing to create a family. It is on you to ask those follow-up questions, to find out what percentage of the money that you are paying to a surrogacy agency is going to the person doing the literal labor. To consider their health, not just your wallet, when you're deciding how many embryos to implant, to resist the urge to control their lifestyle and their most intimate choices. 30% of youth in the child welfare system are queer. We are a mighty and growing constituency, but that is still a vast overrepresentation, okay? And those kids are the most vulnerable, the most poorly served by the system, have the worst outcomes, the most likely to experience maltreatment by caregivers and caseworkers who are charged to protect them from their allegedly unsafe home environments. And unfortunately, in the near term, the experiences of queer youth in care are likely to get even worse. And yet I see very few, some, but not many, queer advocates in abolition spaces. Most of the movement's limited engagement with family policing policy is around bias against queer parents or queer prospective foster or adoptive parents. And there's often an implicit assumption that queer youth are better off placed with queer families. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. I once attended a webinar where someone shared a true anecdote of a trans kid who was placed with a same-sex couple, and they were super, super affirming of that kid's trans identity, and also they did not let him speak to his family of origin in Spanish on the phone. Okay? So the system, when it sees children as individuals at all, seems only able to hold one identity at a time. I remember when I was working for an organization, might have been around 2020, and somebody got so excited that it had just occurred to them to put some coloring pages for the Black kids into the waiting room of our law office. They were like, and I put Barack Obama and George Washington Carver because they finally realized that their clients were Black. But in holding that, they dropped the part where they were children. Who wants to color George Washington Carver? Come on, right? Every child is a jewel with many facets whose fire and brilliance can only be viewed in the light of love. There are missed opportunities here. No one I didn't see anyone making the connection and all of this alleged concern about off-label prescribing of meds to trans youth. If anybody wanted to talk about foster youth, somebody with a foot in both of those worlds might be able to say, well, why is off-label prescribing not okay to address a trans girl's gender dysphoria, but it is fine to prescribe powerful psych meds never studied in children to pacify a cis boy, causing him to grow breasts and lactate. That has happened to a child that I represented. If the ultimate goal of your movement, and I'm not just talking to queer folks here, I'm talking to all the movements. If the ultimate goal of your movement is for your community to be treated just like everyone else, then I'm going to need you to stop and reflect. Because the everyone else y'all want to be treated like isn't everyone. Allyship is a practice. It is not a declaration. Like parent, ally is both a noun and a verb. And you don't get to claim the noun if you're not going to work the verb. Choose a lane. Are you a colleague or a colonizer? We heard from the great Dorothy Roberts and other folks how the social and pseudoscientific construction of race enables victim blaming to justify slavery, explain away disparities, and absolve guilt. Victim blaming is related closely to the just world fallacy, the cognitive bias that assumes people get what they deserve, that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. Believing in a just world is a privilege. When white people talk about childhood, about kids getting to have a childhood, they're talking about allowing their children to believe in a just world. Unfortunately, a lot of folks never quite get around to growing up. The process of raising a Black child, on the other hand, is the process of raising a person to withstand existing in a deeply unjust world, of teaching a person to value themselves in a culture that systematically devalues them. True solidarity, therefore, looks like raising every child to know that justice takes work, and we got a lot of work to do. So, a few quick recommendations with my 2 minutes to spare. We need to demand that folks show up or shut up when it comes to racial justice. Where is your presence? Where is your resources? Where is your explicit and public commitment? Those need to be targeted towards the multiply marginalized people existing at the intersections. And an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I wish that we spent more time offering information and guidance to people who will not be able to afford to involve legal and medical professionals in their family building journeys. Speaking of medical professionals, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine's conference and expo is a bonanza of the business and the money that is involved in family building. If y'all care so much about minorities, why don't you hold a free clinic in the conference city every year and allow people with Medicaid to come and get infertility screening and referrals to local providers? Why don't you offer a sliding scale in your practice? If you want social justice, but not as bad as you want a Ferrari with a vanity plate that says Dr. Daddy or some shit, then you don't get any points for that. Stop hiding from the humans that you are helping to create. They are not the patient, but they are also not a product. Good heavens. Engage with caution in coalition, because coalitions fracture under pressure. Make sure that you know who is going to be a friend to you when the road gets bumpy. And be cautious with whom we share our stories and our spaces. I live in Pennsylvania. There was a story in the Philly Inquirer about somebody who served as an abortion doula, and they were talking about how there not being a mandated reporter enabled them to show up for the person that they were helping in a way they would otherwise not have been able to. And the Pennsylvania legislature read that story and went, oh shit, we need to make them mandated reporters. Okay, so maybe you tell that story in your local Black people. Maybe not everybody needs to hear that story. Okay, let's hold professionals accountable to basic ethics. Call out the hypocrisy of mandated reporting. Where is the AMA in the fight to repeal CAPTA and ASFA? Okay, where's the class action suit? Informed consent is for poor black birthing people too, right? Routine drug testing of people and their newborns without obtaining informed consent. That sure sounds like malpractice to me. Okay, and finally, let's move away from relying on philanthropy or government funding because it always comes with strings attached. Let's just call them what it always comes with chains attached. Okay, I love the person who spoke earlier with their with their for-profit arm of a nonprofit. We need creative ideas and solutions for that. That being said, budgets are value statements. Okay, there's a lot of folks claiming to care about us who aren't putting their money where their mouths are. So hold them accountable to either open your wallet or close your mouth. And now I'll close my mouth and let my co-presenters have a turn. Thanks, y'all.
I'm going to breathe that in for just a moment. Robynne and Fhrynée. Let me do this properly.
Yes.
Robynne and Fhrynée.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
My name is Robynne Lucas. I use she, they pronouns. As Dázon stated, I graduated from Smith in 2022 with a major in Women and Gender Studies, a certificate in Reproductive Health, Rights, and Justice. While I was in school, I focused on reproductive justice, especially Black feminist theories. I read Dorothy Roberts. I read Alexis, Pauline, Gumbs. I read a lot of the people I'm seeing here who inspired me to go on this journey of being a reproductive justice advocate and educating not only myself but my peers on these issues. I'll tell you a little bit about what I'm doing now as my introduction. I am a nursing student at Westchester University. And I do aim to get my women's health NP. I think it's important to conjoin my interests in direct patient care, being in the room with people as they're choosing what contraceptives that they would like to go on or what family planning options they have, and my background from what I studied at Smith in reproductive justice. I don't see a future in which those two things cannot exist simultaneously. As our previous panelist said, we have to find a way for healthcare providers to be educated in reproductive justice futurisms, and so that they can work alongside birth workers, doulas, and also work inside of birthing centers and give the power back to our community. What we're supposed to be talking about is our perspective as young people on reproductive justice futurism and what that means in the current state of the world. But I'll be quiet so that Fhrynée can introduce herself.
Thank you. My name is Fhrynée Lambert. I am Smith class of 2024. I graduated Smith with a double major in Women and Gender Sexuality Studies and Africana Studies, and a Reproductive Health, Rights, and Justice 5 college certificate. I'm currently in my gap year before starting my PhD in the fall at the University of Michigan in Women and Gender Studies and English. And while at Smith, my research was focused mostly on Black mothering and other mothering in the Caribbean, specifically in Haiti, as a form of autonomy building and making. And so I read a lot of Alexis Gumbs as well, and a lot of scholars in this room. So I'm really appreciative that we were invited here. And Robert and I are connected through Loretta, who are both former TAs of, and so and other TAs in the room, yay. And so we, as Robert mentioned, this is panel talking about like our perspective on the youth and their role and what's kind of happening with them. But I also just want to acknowledge just like being able to have that space in this room and the ways that panelists have acknowledged young folks and the work that they're doing and they will be doing for this movement. So yeah, with that, I'll pass it back to Robynne.
Okay, please excuse us. We are a little nervous. So, many people our age were struck with an immense sense of grief as we awoke to our country's accelerated descent into fascism. With Trump's election, I myself felt immense grief, not only for myself, my peers, but for our future children, or for even just the newborns that I am taking care of at work. What world are they going to grow into in their early reproductive years, in their 18, their early teens, all the way into their 20s, all the way into their 30s and 40s, and so on. I think young people sought comfort in one another, along with our elders. I don't know if you guys saw, but me and Fhrynée have been holding hands as a way to help calm our nervous systems down. But that's a great example of us seeking comfort in each other. Some have been tempted to stick our head or dump our heads under the sand. I'm completely misphrasing that term, but you guys get what I'm saying. To cancel out all of the horrible things that is going on in the news, we attempt, and it's a maladaptive coping mechanism, to shut out what's happening outside of or in the world and what's happening in our country and other countries as well. Amidst the onslaught of executive orders threatening our most essential rights, I think it's important that we talk about our unique experience and responsibility as young people to usher in reproductive justice to the future. So our panel is titled Promise or Panic, Do We Freak Out Now or Later or Nah? Thank you, Dázon.
Great name.
So I spoke a little bit about what grief felt like for me when I realized that Donald Trump was going to be president-elect. After I saw the comfort of my friends, talked about what that meant for us, I collected myself and scheduled an appointment for a hormonal IUD. This was something that I had been considering for 1.5 to 2 years because I saw the angle that our politics were heading towards. I thought it was important to protect my right to bodily autonomy while I still had the chance. So I, like many people our age, went to get a hormonal IUD. I had done research about it prior, but I'm sure there are people my age and younger around who didn't have time to do the research because we saw that he got elected and we're like, okay, that means in the next 4 years, we're losing access to Plan B. We're losing access to the pill. We're losing access to all other last standing protections of our rights to bodily autonomy. And since I got the IUD, I have learned in nursing school that increases my chances of an ectopic pregnancy. In a society that does not believe in protecting our right to mifepristone, misoprostol, and all of these treatments that I have now learned as a nursing student are necessary to ending a harmful pregnancy. That is also another concern that I have. But my decision has been made. I made it with the better judgment that I had at the time. And I'm hoping that as we continue to talk about it in the future, we can find other important solutions. Sorry, I'm rambling.
I don't know. Good. And so when I read the title of our panel, the first question I asked myself, okay, let's answer this question. Are we panicking or not? And so I think we all know that a lot of the things that is happening and a lot of the things that we're seeing is meant to make us panic and is meant, especially young folks. I think that's the double-edged sword of social media. It does bring us closer and makes us aware of what's happening, but also it just like bombards us with, okay, yes, you're fighting for this cause, but this is also happening, and this is happening, and this is happening. And so while in stages of figuring out your lives, your like what you want to do, how to pay taxes, et cetera, also having to be bombarded with these things will also hopefully being aware that this is like a responsibility, whether like that's one you take on or not. And so with that, we started talking about what is being presented to us as young folks as like our responsibility. And one of the things that was brought up is this idea of like joy and this idea of like keeping joy, maintaining, like we shall overcome of it all, things like that, which is undoubtedly important. We also started having conversation about like what sort of Dr. Adams brought up in the previous panel about like keeping space for both joy and grief, because in all honesty, we've seen generationally the impact of either like buckling down and getting through it, not talking about like the grief aspect, or not expressing our emotions. So Robynne and I were really interested in like, what does this grief look like? We acknowledge the importance of joy, and we acknowledge the importance of thinking about tomorrow and how do we get through today, but also like, what does this grief look like? And for us, we thought about we started as basic as like funerals that we've been to. I'm Haitian. Like we do a funeral one day and then we party the next, and it's like it's all part of like the grief. I'm sure many of us are familiar with sort of like the joy and the celebration aspect of grief as well, and mourning, and thinking about what that looks like. And the other portion that I literally went up to Dázon right before this. I was like, promise. What does that mean? Like, why did you specifically use that word in the title of our panel? And so that brought me back to the conversation that Alexis, Pauline, Gumbs was having before about like to predict versus to promise, both having to do with aspects of the future of us, some sort of, in some way, one more of like a certainty versus the other. Hopefully a promise is one that we keep. I feel like that's one we learn when we're young. But that also made me think about like, what are we promised as young folks, and what are we promising, and how are we able to understand that? When are we able to understand that, especially if we're not dealing with both, and like the joy and the grief of that moment.
I'd like to thank and uplift Fhrynée on her piece about the interplay of both grief and joy within our movement. I believe that this conference has been a gathering where we're expressing our grievances around the technologies that are already here and also further developing. And we're also celebrating that there's so many wonderful people doing the work to ensure that our future is sustained within the reproductive justice framework. I think another huge part of us being able, as young people, to ground ourselves is through dialectical strategies to calm our nervous systems whenever we do come across so many different social media pages about what's happening in the world. So my favorite is TIP, which is temperature changing, intense exercise, progressive muscle relaxation, and paced breathing. My particular favorites are temperature, because I will either dip my hands or my face into cold ice water that'll shock my nervous system back into its equilibrium so that I can think with a more conjoin both my emotional and logical brain into something that my therapist has called mindfulness. And
Hashtag get a therapist.
hashtag get a therapist, and also share your resources. I mentioned a little bit before about community building and storytelling, and even just the hand-holding that Fhrynée and I were doing. We are in community with one another as our nervous systems are going haywire. I think another great solution for me personally is imagining where I fit within the solution. I want to be a nurse. I want to be a maternity nurse, but our panels today have caused me to think more about what that looks like working within an oppressive system that is our American hospital system. And how can I best support other birth workers and doulas as they're coming in with our patients? I feel challenged not only to come in with my background in reproductive justice and reproductive justice futurism, but how can I share that with other healthcare providers as I'm in the room with Black women getting C-sections and their anesthesiologists are complaining that they are a difficult patient while they are under. How can reproductive justice futurism be extended to them in a way that it can protect our patients? And that did happen when I first started my job as a maternal care tech at a hospital, which I knew the possibility of that happening. I knew that it was, it's a lived reality of many Black women. And even that questioned me about what I could do more outside of just my academic work and writing to protect patients in those spaces.
Another thing that we would like to add is also this idea, both of us are particularly interested in the transnational lens, whether that be of where we come from or in our studies or research. And as we all know, like even with the founding of RJ, like the transnational lens is one of the key, if not, or I would say the key to like sustaining, to building, to finding alternative systems, to surviving, honestly. But with that lens, and I'll say this very broadly in an out of awareness that we're being recorded, but with that lens also brought in the citizenship lens and what we're seeing in my community, especially I mentioned earlier, I'm Haitian, and what that means for people's decision making in when and where to give birth or with whom, and how they will be impacted. And so in thinking about the ways that policies, especially as we are in the United States and we are aware that like funding can be snatched up just as quickly here as it is abroad in a lot of spaces, and people can be sent to very unsafe spaces, and birthing people often have to make decisions or use sort of their womb as ways to stay safe and to protect themselves. And we can like talk about like the ethics, et cetera, but like very much thinking about the ways that citizenship comes and plays a role into the conversations that we're having today. And I also, in the spirit of sort of intergenerational work, and I apologize, I feel like I'm just gonna, okay. So this book, Undrowned, yay, hashtag, is literally my Bible. And when I was thinking about like, how do I end this? I don't know how to stop talking. And so I was like, when you don't know how to say something, you read somebody else's words. And so I kind of wanted to, when I was mulling over like the ideas of like what I feel like we as youth are feeling and how I want to sort of articulate it and how I want us to interact with it, like this paragraph came to me. I apologize, I'm not going to read it as eloquently as probably Alexis Gumbs would, but hopefully it still resonates. Okay, so I too have been moving in circles, confused. I too have been struggling to breathe. I too have wondered how did I even get so far from what my body and my spirit needed? And I thought I was done writing about striped dolphins, but so many of us dizzy and labored, bewildered and estranged. So what would I say if I was a striped dolphin? I love you. And even on your sickest, saddest day, you deserve an ocean as blue as your name. You deserve a safety as deep as your need. You deserve food, community, school, and home. And you were not wrong to associate with your kindred. You were not wrong to breathe loud about what you believed. And the dizziness you feel is justified. We are living in a world off course, and the pressure in your lungs is urgency. We have to learn the language of this air. We are sick of these tired cycles of economic vulnerability, resource grabs, and waste and harm and splintering down. We are ready to breathe differently and evolve.